looking, remembering our conversations we've had with other creators and be like, what has been wrong this whole time? What do people never fix? And how do we fix it? How do we just create a better place for everyone to work? So, and that includes also how do we interact with retailers in a better way? How do we get to fans? And so a lot of what we want to build is just something where you're just going to have to see us walk the walk, because all we want to do is create good material. We're not going to be, we're not going to worry about competing with Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We will have to worry about competing with other publishers, but I'm also of the mind of like, there's room enough for everybody. More good comics are good for the comics industry. More good comics for retailers to sell is good for comics.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where we talk to the people behind the scenes of the comic book industry and try and get into their lives, get under the hood, see what makes them tick, what has built their career or business in comics so that you can do the same in yours, and hopefully we can all be a bit more successful. You know, the reason I do this podcast, aside from the literally dozens of views and downloads, literally dozens, is the excuse to research and interview people I really thought I knew. Now, the downside of this is sometimes you pull together the resume of someone you thought you knew and you immediately hate them as much, maybe just a little, because they're able to get that much done in one career. So is the case with Jamie S. Rich. He is the writer of 3 excellent prose novels, dozens of graphic novels, and an editorial career that spans Dark Horse, Oni Press, DC, including being the group editor for Batman and Justice League titles, and his own imprint, Tapas Media, IDW, and finally a company that is probably, but definitely not called Redacted, with Philip Sablik and Jeremy Hahn. I'm not sure why he's wasting his time here, but I sure am grateful to say welcome to the show, Jamie. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. I would like to say this is the first time I've ever seen you in a t-shirt. I feel like I've seen you probably a dozen times over the years.
I don't remember the last time I would have worn a t-shirt to a comic book convention.
Yeah.
It might have been early 2000s. I wore a Gorillaz shirt when Gorillaz were pretty new. And it was yellow, but I was like, no one else has a Gorillaz shirt, and I got made fun of for looking like a lemon. So
that was it.
Never wear yellow ever again.
Never again. Suit and tie from now on.
Exactly.
No more lemon jokes for you, buddy. Well, I wanted to start this off by writing something that you wrote. And let's see if I can pull it up here. Let's see.
I'm scared.
What can I say? I laughed. I cried. It became a part of me. I anxiously waited for number 2 to come out. I sat in my chair all week, sweat dripping down my face and spitting shards of nails on the floor. Finally, Friday came. I ditched school and rushed to Pee Wee Comics. I tore my way to the rack, knocking down people on the way, including a bearded guy with about 40 comics. Rushed to the end of the rack and grabbed Booster's book. I chucked the 75 cents in the guy's eye and ran all the way home. I wonder if my dad's still waiting for me back in the car.
I think I was 13.
That is from the letters column of Booster Gold number 7 about Booster Gold number 3. I have to say, I feel kind of proud of myself because when I heard you mention that in another interview, I thought, who do I know? And I thought about Aaron Holland, who is a retailer in Florida and one of the biggest Booster Gold fans I know. And of course he had it nearby. So yeah.
The rack is currently out of the room, but my comics rack has a signed copy of that comic that Dan Jurgen sent me when I was working at DC, and he found out that I had been a big Booster Gold fan. And so he sent in, it says on the cover, like, you should have your first letters comic. Because that is the first letter I got published in any comic book. I think it was probably 13.
So the first piece of published writing right there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I just did an excerpt. This thing it's a
it was a bit breathless, definitely is establishing a style. But yeah, and then I got the taste of it and I wrote Booster Gold like every month or Grendel every month. And
whoa, really? Yeah.
yeah, and then I got printed in all kinds of different comics, and that was what I was after. There was at the time like letter hacking was such a big thing, and it was funny because it suddenly locked me into this network, and they were all adults, and I was a teenager, and they were all super serious and like, we're gonna influence how comics are made and by sharing our opinions. And I was like, I just want to have my name in the back of my favorite comic books. That's
You're
all I
right, exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, and that's so how and then I started going to Comic-Con, and I was 15, 1987, my first San Diego Comic-Con. I walked up to the Comico booth and introduced myself, and Dinah Schutz finished it for me. I was like, hi, I'm Jamie Rich. She said, of Quartzville, California. And I was like, yes, of Quartzville, California. And it like blew my mind. Matt Wagner knew my name, and then the next year they remembered me.
Oh,
It was crazy. It's small enough back then that it was easier to
yeah.
do. Diana's the one who, when I was in college, was like, let me know, when you're out of school and we can see about getting you a job. And so I was 21 when I started as her editorial assistant while she was editor in chief at Dark Horse, working on
Oh,
Grendel. So which was my, real, that was the comic that changed me from being the
yeah.
Booster Gold kid, X-Men kid, to like, oh my God, like what else? Look at all this other stuff you can do with comic books. So to actually then work on it was like pretty thrilling.
I tell you, my first, not my first San Diego, but my first like San Diego meeting a big name comic book artist in like a private setting, right? Not like on a convention room floor, but at a party. I'm chatting with this guy. We're having a good conversation about getting old and having kids, and and suddenly somebody calls him Matt, and I realized I'd been talking to Matt Wagner for like half an hour, and in that moment I thought, what do I do here? All I want to talk about is Grendel.
Yeah.
That's but I know the minute I talk about Grendel, the whole conversation changes. It was very strange. But I remember that day very, very clearly.
Yeah. And if you know Matt, he can talk about just about anything.
Yeah.
I would say he and Howard Chaykin are the two like most intimidating in terms of like what they consume and how they remember it.
Yeah.
And we'll talk at a high level about art. I don't know if you've ever talked with Chaykin, but he'll start singing songs from musicals.
I don't think I ever have. I met him once. Actually, I want to say it was at the Valiant office. I think he came by. Yeah.
He's actually the first person in comics I think I ever met, or at least at my first comic book convention, which was like a creation con at a hotel in Los Angeles. And Joe Duffy and John Romita Jr. were the guests. And I was a total Chaykin fanatic. So I was, again, like 13, 14, hanging around Howard Chaykin's table while he's cussing up a storm and saying things I don't understand.
I was about to say, you're at 13 or 14 reading Chaykin. That's, as somebody who sold comics to the precocious 13, 14-year-old man, I would be real nervous selling you Chaykin stuff. So
the Soar mentioned in that letter, Pee Wee Comics, they were in Canoga Park. My dad signed a waiver that I could have whatever I wanted. There was some divorce guilt in there, and so
yes,
count, and I could get whatever I wanted. So it was a fantastic time to be getting into comics because I was reading like X-Men, which was like probably the Byrne era was ending and the Paul Smith era was starting. Junior again. I would love to Byrne. Alpha Flight was one of my favorites, but also I'm reading like Dark Knight, Watchmen, Comico, Eclipse, First Comics, Love and Rockets. I was reading everything and was kind of a latchkey kid. So I was like spending my mom worked nights when I lived there. So I spent all night reading comic books and listening to the radio, which the 80s radio was that eclectic too, because your top 40 was, Tiffany and Debbie Gibson, but also Adamant and Duran Duran and Prince. and
Yeah.
Madonna. So it was like, and then hip hop coming in. So I always was kind of just sucking in everything.
Well, I contend that there was something special, especially about the mid '80s, that just like as far as comics or movies, as you said, music, pop culture itself was
Yeah,
finding something new. It was like it was transitioning out of something old into something new. It was special, you know.
yeah. I mean, in the movies, you had effects coming in and technology changing, but also indie stuff bubbling up. You'd cable and VHS, which was giving you all sort of access to things that you didn't have
Right.
before. And you know, it was strange because you had all these choices, but you also had such a limited ways to get them, that it made everything also feel different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everyone was getting a lot of the same things. Wizard of Oz was on TV like once a year, and you'd have to wait and watch it,
Right.
and so everyone would watch it, and that kind of stuff I think
Or
is
HBO
interesting.
would have like maybe 4 movies in
Yeah.
rotation, and you would watch the same movie every day for
Or there's movies where I'm like, did I ever see that all the way through, or did I just pick it up every time it was on? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's true. It's you think about it. I mean, the not only were we as consumers picking that up, but the artists that were producing work were picking that up, and it has influenced a whole generation of artists and creators as well. I mean, so I think that there's just something crucial about that point. And I know especially in comics, lots have been talked about in the 1985, 86 era.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. There's something really, really special about that. So your folks, what did your so I assume that they split. How are they? Or they
It's,
artists and also
no, I'm like I'm an anomaly within my family. There's no real precedent for the creative type across both sides of the family. My maternal grandfather, who I only knew a little bit, like I bonded with him near the end of his life when I was still like 8 or 9, probably maybe even younger, because he discovered I liked to draw and I liked comics, and he revealed he didn't talk to people. He was from Yugoslavia. He didn't talk much, and always was grumpy. But he revealed he had wanted to be a cartoonist growing up, and pulled out this correspondence course he had taken, which I wish I had saved. I wasn't smart enough to save it over time, and it was like this huge
oh
stack because he's like, my parents wouldn't let me go to school for art. I had to get a job. But I
yeah
tried to do this correspondence course, and so we sat there, and he drew something, and had me draw it as well. And it was like it opened up this thing, like not knowing at this time. Sadly, that this whole time that there's this guy sitting there that no
yeah
one realized had these ambitions. And he passed away shortly after, but that's about the only trace we can find. On my father's side, there was a lot of evangelical preachers / construction workers. So my
yeah.
grandfather ran a framing business and was a preacher and a missionary.
That's a
And so my
common Venn
father,
diagram. Yeah,
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 my father was a preacher until I was like in first grade, and then moved strictly into like carpentry. Um, so yeah, it was a strange upbringing. I spent a lot of time outdoors in my imagination, making up stories. So by the time I discovered
yeah.
comics in fifth grade, I think I was primed to sort of dive in.
And your dad, the evangelical preacher, was okay with you picking up, or he just didn't process
He
what it
didn't,
was you were reading.
he didn't look, but I know from a time like overhearing him in a conversation of like his brother wondering like, you okay? Because he wears like weird t-shirts and he dyes his hair. This was like when I was a little into a teenager, and my dad's like, I know what he's doing, I know where he is, and there's a lot of other trouble he could be getting into
Yeah,
than spending his time watching weird movies and listening to pop records. So yeah, we would go like at that period, we'd go to every movie. Like he took me to, I saw Scarface in the theater and I was like 11. We went to everything. So we didn't know somehow
wow.
he was not like censoring or filtering. So, and I'm proud of young Jamie because I thought it sucked then, and when I rewatched it as an adult, I'm like, yeah, this movie still sucks. I don't care what people say. That movie's terrible.
I don't know. I don't think I've seen it since I saw it the first time. But I guess that says something, right? Because there's plenty else that I have. Wow. All right. Cool. Well, so you just ingested story. You just sucked up story, right? Yeah, I can see that. It would definitely. I think we had a very similar upbringing in that, being a child of a divorce and latchkey kid, and just I just read everything, but I didn't really get access to comics until later. So it was, but yeah, I wonder now, the kids all us in in this generation would have a very different experience.
Oh yeah,
yeah. All right, so you spend 4 years at Dark Horse, right? Mm-hmm. And then Bob moves on to Oni Press and brings you along with. Is that how that worked?
Yeah. So in the early stages, I was hanging around with him and Joe Nosmek as they were planning. In fact, Matt Fraction told me once, before any of us would have known who Matt Fraction was, he was in a Greek restaurant in Portland and he saw the three of us and he knew who Bob and I were, and he was like, "What are those guys doing? I wonder what they're talking about." And we were probably sitting there planning Oni Press. So Bob and Joe founded it, and we're like, when we get ramped up, we're going to bring you over. And so yeah, I think they were just about to publish when they brought me in. So it would have been in the spring of '98. So I think that summer was when the Oni Double Feature #1 and Bad Boy came out, or they might have just come out when I jumped over.
Yeah.
Pretty much from the go, and stuff. Some of the stuff we did, like Geisha was something that Dark Horse had returned down, so I sent it over to them, and then that started a long collaboration with Andy Watson. Duncan Fegredo was supposed to draw the Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics, and there was some kind of mix-up supposedly in the approvals. And so then they rescinded his approval. And I remember calling Bob and being like, I don't know what to do. Duncan just lost all this work. And Bob's like, oh, we need someone to draw these Kevin Smith comics. So he'd be perfect.
Perfect.
So it was funny how that was all happening. Kind of a conflict of interest, but I was preparing for my departure.
Go over there. I'll see you in 2 months. I'll be right there.
Yeah, don't let anybody else start on Geisha. I'm going to get that.
Well, so in between though, I guess just after that. So you've started at Oni, and this is about the time that you put out Cut My Hair, right? How long did this
came? So ostensibly, I was leaving Dark Horse to finish my first novel, Cut My Hair, which had sort of been drafted over the previous few years. And so I think that came out, though, a couple years later. It might have been around 2000. It actually initially was put out. Scott Morris created a company called Crazy Fish, that he was basically like, I have some extra money and I'm going to create a pool for friends of mine. And so he published 3 or 4 books, and a couple of which, like, the creators went on to be big Pixar directors just like him.
Well, I will tell you, I knew Scott when he was at the time about that time. I had a comic shop in Santa Clarita, which is just right next to Cal Arts,
right?
And so Scott was in once a week, and so I got to see Little Gray Man kind of be created, and I'm blanking on his other books, but kind of saw him develop as this, like, crazy talent. And so when he left and then it was doing stuff like this, I think part of the reason it was on my radar so early. So I do remember that book coming out and reading and enjoying it back then, without them not really knowing who you were. But this book is awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, back then, I threw a Mike Allred cover on it and some illustrations in it, and I think we sold 3,000 copies out, like, the first print run. And that's when Joe Nosmek was like, all right, you've proven your point. You did it. Because I wasn't going to force my way into Oni and make Oni publish me. He's like, we'll do the reprint. And at that point, Oni was actually helping distribute Scott stuff. So it was like
Okay,
all the
that makes
MJ12
sense.
stuff went, Crazy Fish MJ12 went through Oni for distribution anyway. But Scott bankrolled it, and I mean, I put it all together on the side with designers and stuff. So yeah, Joe's like, we'll do it, and I ended up publishing all my novels through there. Though eventually, I liken it to like this is like building a car at an airplane factory. Um, yeah, I'd take those books to conventions, and people would come up and they'd flip through it, and then like they would always do it the same. They'd flip through it, they'd close it, they'd turn away, and then they'd look back and they'd look again, almost like they couldn't believe it. Like, why are there so many words in this thing? So it was kind of strange, but that was the turn of the century. Like,
Yeah.
we could do about anything and be guaranteed like a 1,500 copy sale. And black and white that was a big time for black and white comics and for self-publishing and all that stuff.
It was, like I said, that was right about the time I bought the shop in 2000, and so that was right about that time that it was, I don't know, it was some of my favorite stuff was being made during that period. And this is actually a good transition. I have in thinking about what I want to do with this show and what kind of stories I want to try and cobble together. There's one question that came up when I was talking to, I assume, our mutual friend, Dennis Culver in San Diego this year. And I'm just going to ask this question. Can you tell me what the Warren Ellis Forum was and why anyone under 30 should care?
The Warren Ellis Forum was a particularly, that was the big hub around that time for comics. You had Jinx World, which was Brian Bendis's message board, but that was far more, particularly once he became the big deal at Marvel, that was far more focused on that side of comics and very much around Brian, and was a little bit like, I mean, if you go back and read Power's letter columns, it was like that. It was like the Howard Stern show for comics in terms of the audience.
Yeah.
And everyone trying to dunk on each other. But at the Warren Ellis Forum, Warren ran it a little, not necessarily stricter, but it was like, this is the focus, these are the forums, and everyone was on it talking about comics. And it was just a very positive place. It was run that way, so that like if you were going to be a troll, you're going to be out. And Warren created a platform for people not just to talk to each other about comics, but you could go there and be like, this is a comic book I'm putting out. And you'd get, again, like a really instant bump off of it. And so a lot of folks already professional were there. Oni was on there. Top Shelf was on there. I remember Kurt Busiek hanging around, Larry Young. So Brian Wood kind of came up through there. Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction met on there. So there's a lot of folks that later became, if they weren't professional already, they became professionals. So for that period of time, that's where everyone was sort of coming through. And then there'd be side forums where you would do different things or interact in different ways. A lot of the British writers were coming through there, like Kieran Gillen, Anthony Johnson. So it just was a very exciting and welcoming place. And it made you feel good about comics. And it was an atmosphere where it was like, well, we're all here doing the same things. So no need to fight. There's room enough for everybody. And let's have intelligent conversations. And retailers were there. Pretty much all strata of the industry. And eventually I think it shut down because Warren got tired, but then also he started doing more and more specialized forums, and probably not best to get into those, but for that period, for a couple of years, that was the place to hang out.
Yeah, it really was. I can tell you, I think that the Comics Pro, the trade organization for comics retailers, I think that was formed out of there. They originally incepted there. I know that there was like the CBIA was another forum that actually happened on the same platform for retailers and publishers to talk. So yeah, I don't know. It was really wonderful. It was almost like whatever comics Twitter, comics threads, or whatever it is
Yeah.
now. But it was in such a, you're right, it was just culturally, it was a very succinct kind of place without a whole lot of, I don't remember there being a whole lot of enforcement, to keep it that way, but maybe,
I
I
don't
don't
think
know.
there had to be. I mean, he had moderators, and I think occasionally people had to be shut down
Yeah.
for being rude. But I think for the most part, everyone accepted like this is a spot to be your best self and not. There were definitely debates over things, but
Sure.
there were plenty
Yeah.
of other places to go to troll each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And, if you just wanted to go off and, I don't know, post pictures of scooters all day at each other, I think is what we ended up doing on the Larry Young forum.
Right.
If you remember. Oh, no, wasn't there a fun record? I don't remember. It was,
Fun Record, yeah, it was like
yeah.
Dennis Culver and Brian and them.
Yeah.
I used to hang out in the V forum, which was I think the Brit writers had started. Was it Nick Locking? I think it was one of
Oh,
the men
yeah.
behind it. And I remember on there we would have image wars where it was someone would post a funny graphic and the person that you were challenged would have to post a response graphic, and you'd go on for like 20 rounds,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
everyone would vote like who created the best chain jokes. uh and like that would go on, it went on for days, just people challenging each other. And yeah, it's hard to imagine that now not just getting so awful.
Well, it was, I remember that, like, the moment you could put a photo in a post
Yeah.
easily,
That
that
was a
was
game
game
changer.
changer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this is, we're still in this timeline. Around 2004, you leave Oni as the EIC and then go through a period of really just churning some books out, right? And most of them came out through Oni, it seemingly.
Yeah, for the most part, like I had a pretty lengthy relationship with those guys. When I left, I was working on like the prose sequel and had conceived of 12 Reasons Why I Love Her, which I think went into production within like the first year of me having left. Once we found Joel Jones, it was written at that point.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of looking for the right person to draw it. So that would have been my, I think, very first thing, but in terms of my first comics being published.
Yeah. What? So how was that experience? I mean, you at this point you'd edited a number of books, and come up through the sort of editorial ranks from assistant to editor in chief. How do you moving into that sort of creative role? What is that transition like? Is it? I mean, I guess you're just better informed about what is needed.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good idea of how things are going to roll, and I think there was an element of I had absorbed enough that I had a pretty good um, innate sense of like what fits on a page, how these things flow. I'm not, as a writer, I am not as conscious as some are of like what lands on the last panel of the page to make you turn the panel on.
Right.
It just kind of comes to me, and that book in particular, I remember it was just brainstorming one night. I'm like, all right, if I could just write whatever sort of romantic movie I wanted to write, who would I cast and how would I do it? And there was a song by a Brit pop band called My Life Story called 12 Reasons Why I Love Her. And I was like, well, how about I take that? And I just created 1 through 12 and I started filling in the slots. And even like structurally, it just kind of happened all within like a half hour of, I knew I wanted to like how I wanted to shuffle it through time. Like you'd see the makeup before you see a breakup and end it a certain way. And it's just kind of, but also like reasons shouldn't be simple. Like, oh, I love her hair or her laugh. But I wanted like there have to be some that are non-narrative. Like, so scene where she talks about her why she likes each season. And so, yeah, it just sort of, and it was then easy to write because you used to write one at a time, and it kind of came together as it is. Like it didn't have to do much changing or editing. I did have some discussions with Joelle while she was drawing it, where she wanted to understand why certain choices were made. because there were some parts that get a little heavy, and they could have been heavier in terms of what the characters talk about, and that was, you know, making sure we were giving it the right amount of attention in terms of the drama and the bigger meaning behind it. But um so, and then watching her do it and yeah, approach each different reason and change up her style a little bit. But was really her very first significant work. She'd only done a few pages of printed comics. So that was exciting as well. And it just, yeah, it was a pretty awesome experience for a first graphic novel, that it just went so well and had an impact pretty quickly.
So it was your first, and it was her first as well?
Yeah.
Where did you find her?
So we had an artist who had dropped out, and we're trying to find someone else. And at one point, I actually had made a list of like, it's like, James, what if I just call in all my favors to James Lucas Jones, the editor, like call in all these favors and get 12 different people to draw each one. And I made a list, and he smartly was like, look, this is your first thing, and you don't want to resort to that. You really want someone that can come in and collaborate. And so I was starting to despair, like, because just nothing was coming together. And I had like styles that I was into. Like, I think we had approached, like, at the time Flight had just come out, and we approached like Vera Broskel and Jen Wang, and like, so that was in my head, like, these are the styles that I'm into. And Diana Schutz, my first boss, was editing this anthology called Sexy Chicks at Dark Horse, and it was all women creators, and they released a cover that was a mosaic of photos of contributors, and there's one woman in there that nobody knew who she was. And I messaged Diana, and I was like, who is that? And she said, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anyone, because I like that people are trying to, that it's creating people talking. It's like, but it's this woman who, she works in a bar downtown, and she really should be drawing full time, but I don't have anything to offer her to get her out of bartending. So she connected me to her. We met at a coffee shop in our neighborhood, because it turned out we lived 2 blocks apart on the exact same street.
Oh, wow.
And at one point, she'd been at a coffee shop working, and a friend of mine saw her and was like, you need to go up the street to the video store, because there's a guy that works there named Jamie who writes comics, and you guys should work together. And she had come in the store not looking for me, but I looked up her account, and I wrote out her information. I had created her account. So we had crossed paths and didn't know it. So we met at this coffee shop. I looked at her portfolio and was like, oh man, I hope she doesn't hate the script, because I need her to draw this. But we became instant friends that day and hung out the entire day. And I think even did karaoke for the first time that night.
Oh,
and yeah, we've been best friends ever since. So 25 years later.
You do this for a while, right? You've essentially become a writer. And yeah. I think that's really interesting that you've kind of gone back and forth between this, freelancer, creating your own your own stories, your own IP, as it were, and then you end up coming back into kind of an editorial role later on. But before you do that, you did something that's not unlike what I'm doing here, however, incredibly much better produced than what I'm doing here. You did the Back to the Gutters series on YouTube. Tell me about how that came together, because those are really great episodes.
Yeah, so we did 2 series. One was From the Gutters, and one was Back to the Gutters.
Okay.
And around that time, I think, we were talking. I was sort of talking about wanting to do a podcast, and joking that Joelle always joked the guy could be the Mark Maron of comics, because like I know everybody.
Yeah,
I kind of am like weirdly on the sidelines sometimes, and grouchy as hell.
Yeah.
But there was someone we knew that was just like, well, you should do this, but it's comics, so you should have a video component. And they were interested in producing it, so he put that stuff together, and so we shot the first series, and the concept was great. The Matt Wagner episode was our first episode, and that's the proof of concept, and it's kind of the only time that it was exactly what it we wanted it to be, which was a segment. There's 3 segments. One was just chatting. One was in the studio watching him work, and then the third was always supposed to be kind of a wild card, where creators would talk about whatever other pursuits they had, habits, hobbies, passions. Matt loved to cook, so he made me food and demonstrated how to make it. Turns out most other comics folks don't have good hobbies. Like most of their hobbies are sitting around, like me, sitting around watching movies, listening to records. So it didn't come quite together for the rest of them, but in that regard, but we had some pretty amazing episodes, and we were in the middle of the second series when DC called me, and that's when Ben Dewey stepped in and finished out the series. Because DC was basically like, you can't keep doing that. Conflict of interest. So it was too bad, because at that point I moved from Portland to Los Angeles, which would have opened up our ability to get guests, because we were mainly just getting people coming through Portland who lived there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was not meant to be at that point. But I'm surprised by how many people still, like, particularly other professionals and artists, are like, I used to listen to that while I drew. And
that's great.
yeah, like just the insight that they were getting from like these deeper conversations about creating comics.
I think I'm getting some of that same feedback from, like, publishing and retailers from this project, and I gotta tell you, like, it just thrills me every single time, because I just assume I'm making it for myself, really, because it's just you and me on a call that could just be a Zoom about whatever it is we're working on. But yeah, it's really, I don't know, that part of it is really fulfilling. I'm not surprised that you would have to, like, get pulled away from it in order to
I
stop producing.
enjoyed like getting deep with people and seeing what would come out. Like, the Mike Allred episode gets into really existential stuff. Mike Oeming gets really personal. It's talking about, and also talking about aliens and things. And so it would be, I still try to point people to the episode with Dave Stewart where he shows me, walks you through like what flatting is, what the color process is, because most people don't know what a flatter does or how that works.
Right.
And at the time, actually, he was working on Space Dumplings by Craig Thompson. And so we had to go to Craig and get permission. Like, it's okay if we show some of this to people before it's out. But it was very informative in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now I feel really silly, because I do kind of remember these coming out, but in doing the research, I landed on Back to the Gutters, but I didn't see From the Gutters. So I'm looking forward to these. These sound awesome.
Yeah, they might have been like, there's 2 separate channels, but they tend to cross over in the algorithm once you start watching. The problem is that initially we did it with somebody, a third partner, who we ended up having to part ways with. And part of actually that first series looks a certain way because what we discovered was he was spending a lot of money on cameras and things that were like, dude, like, we don't have that money. Like, we're just 3 guys. Like, this is just supposed to be guerrilla style. And so then the next series worked with some people like, yeah, let's get like digital devices. This can be done cheaply and still look good.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't have to be, but for the other person, he was a professional. And so for him, it was like, this has to look professionally shot.
He had a standard.
So yeah, just a disagreement there. And so we had to change the title so that we could keep going.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. Well, I can tell you that, I mean, I've had opportunities to do live interviews, and I only feel like I'm just getting comfortable with this format. And the idea of having to set up cameras and sound and, this does not sound fun.
Yeah. If you've got someone who's fussing with the lights and stuff, and it starts to be a problem of like, you're sitting there every day, you're taking up someone's whole day.
Yeah.
They're like, we'll be ready soon. It's like, typical film production, but
yeah,
they just want to get out. We did do one live at a Rose City Comic Con, I think it was, and I don't know if we taped it, but Nate Rock Quarry, who was a Ultimate Fighter who was doing a book called Zombie Cage Match that I helped him shape, was there. And so as the like wild card demonstrating, he basically choked me out.
Oh, did you go out?
Not quite, but like he knew when to stop, but it was like, and I knew what he was, I had agreed to it, but I feel like if that video existed, there's a lot of people who would probably enjoy watching me get choked out. So that'd probably be the most popular. But my favorite was Ibrahim Mustafa trying to teach me to break dance, because he's a champion break dancer, and
Whoa.
I am completely uncoordinated and unskilled in
Yeah.
terms of movement.
Did you pick anything up at all?
Not really. He taught me very fundamental popping and locking at that point.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I am not physically agile or coordinated. I was out. I know it's very name droppy, but I was out with sushi with Jim Lee, and he made fun of me for eating with a fork. And I was like, I suck at chopsticks, man. I don't know what to tell you. You're an artist. You use your fingers. I know.
So you're like stabbing the sushi then with your fork?
I think I'd gotten probably not like a teriyaki bowl and make it easy for myself. Yeah.
All right, I just want to make sure. So you, in the middle of all this, some really incredible books came out during this period, including Lady Killer, which still remains one of my favorites. And as a kind of production nerd of the printing, I love the format, size, and shape, and all the choices that were made. I don't know if you're involved in that at all, but that hardcover for Lady Killer is really spectacular.
That one I was not. I mean, Lady Killer is like almost entirely Joel. Joel brought the idea to me and asked if I would sort of pitch in, if I wanted to work with her developing it. And at that point, we probably were going to be more like, weren't quite sure where we were going to go with it or how we were going to do it. But over a year or two, there was a lot of back and forth and talking about it, planning it out. And then ultimately, when it landed at Dark Horse, at that point, she took everything we had talked about and distilled it and picked out what she wanted. And so really, like, that book's reflective of who she is and what she wanted to do. And on the first series, I'm way over credited as a co-writer. I was more of I was liking it back to Hellboy. Remember Hellboy Volume 1? John Byrne wrote dialogue and helped out. And at the end of it, it was like, you don't need me, kid. You got this. And so Lady Killer, most of what I was doing on that series was, contributing some dialogue, helping work out sequences sometimes, and just sort of being a second, but more involved editor in that regards. And so it was a little, I think, forced in terms of going to DC when the first series was coming out, of like, well, I can't work on this anymore anyway. But I think if you look at the two different books and how the writing changed, in particular on the second series, I feel like you can really see the confidence coming through in how Joelle wrote. Particularly, I remember being surprised about the narration, because she was always sort of less words was her thing. So seeing her develop in that regards was really fascinating. And ultimately, we saw that come to fruition when we worked together again, when I edited her on Catwoman. But yeah, I mean, I'm very proud just to be a part of that series.
That's well, as you should. Like I said, it is a favorite, and kudos to whoever made all those production decisions, because
I think a lot of it was her. I think Carrie Grazzini might have been the designer on that, who was way back at Dark Horse. But yeah, like, they all definitely went all out on that one.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so DC calls. They say, we know you're just writing your thing and you're doing your sort of TV show, but we want you to come and get a real big boy job again, right? So how does that go? Who makes that call?
So they called me. Shelley Bond called me, and I always joked that my biggest negotiation tactic was not telling them that I was flat broke and didn't know what I was going to do next. Because I was kind of in I don't know what's here for me. I don't know what's clicking. And I feel like I remember but it's probably an invented memory. I remember standing in my apartment because I had a big window looking out over Portland and wondering what should I do. And Shelly, and the phone rings, and I was like, whoa. But it was basically, the pitch was we're reforming Vertigo in California. None of the other editors but Shelly are moving out, and she's basically like, I know you're gonna say no, but I have to ask. And the thing was, like, I did not have any intention of returning to editing. I'd always been more focused on wanting to be in the writing realm, but it was Vertigo. And
Yeah.
it's like, this is too good to pass up. So I was like, well, let me think about it. And then I actually talked to my good friend Sierra Hahn, who had been a former DC employee, and at that point was still at Dark Horse.
Yeah.
And she gave me the best advice, which was like, see it all the way through. You can always say no. They're going to say no to you without thought. And
Right.
people forget that you have the same ability. And so it went from the job I wasn't sure I wanted to like the job I really wanted. And Comics Pro actually was that in Portland that year, and Dio came up, and so we had a sidebar meeting where we talked it through, and yeah, it sort of fell together from there, and it seemed like the thing to do, and it was interesting time to join, and
Yeah.
led to so much more.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a year. It was definitely a transition period for them, moving from New York to Burbank. So they moved you down. Is that how that? And so you
Yeah,
went.
so I moved down and was living in North Hollywood, and for the first few months, it was literally almost just Vertigo and some of the Wildstorm holdovers in those offices while we were waiting for everybody else to come. So outside of Shelley and Rowena Yao, who had come out already as an assistant, the rest of us were brand new. So Ellie Pyle and Molly Mahan and myself. So I was the token male on that staff.
That has
But
kind of been that's kind of been a theme for you, though, right? You really have interacted, with women throughout your career, and maybe over-indexing women throughout your career.
yeah, I mean, I was also that kid that was always friends with the girls
Yeah.
in school. But I mean, even that first convention, I showed my very first comics pitch to Joe Duffy, who was very kind and gave me advice. I remember the biggest piece of advice was I pitched Marvel a giant crossover, because of course they needed that from like a kid in
Yeah.
junior high.
Yeah.
They didn't have any idea what to do next. And in the one pager, it starts off with a mysterious figure who doesn't get revealed until halfway down. And she's like, well, your editor and your artist need to know who that is. So when you do a
Yeah.
document like this, there's no being coy. You have to be upfront, because particularly if you're writing a script, your artist has to know like what shape is this character. And I think it was Longshot that was revealed. Like, it's Longshot. Because at that point he had only been in his miniseries.
Right.
And so so just from the very start, that seemed to be like a common denominator. And I don't know, I feel like in indie comics, a lot of women cartoonists were just telling stories. I was more interested in personal style stories, and I felt like at the time a lot of them were being more individual and less, well, I really loved Tarzan when I was 12, so here's a version of Tarzan. Which I think we're getting a lot more with a lot of the fellas coming up at the time. They're emulating the things that had influenced them, as opposed to like liking comics but not necessarily seeing things that they related to. And also I was really into manga, and so that was obviously influencing a whole new generation of creatives.
Right.
But yeah, it was never intentional, but it always seemed to happen that way. And I've had a lot of fruitful creative relationships with women writers, artists, editors, other staff members.
Yeah. Are you you and I seem to be of a similar generation. I'm just assuming based on what you talked about in your timeline. I will say that, like, as a middle-aged man, like, I get real kind of stagnant in the stuff that I'm interested in. It's really difficult for me to see something new and that like sparks that interest. But throughout your career, you seem to have been riding a wave of new, like always kind of pushing into the edges of what is kind of a new voice. Um, how do you keep that up? How do you keep that? I mean, is there an excitement there? Is it just part of who you are? How do you do that?
I mean, yeah, because I always feel like there's still a million things I don't know, but I've always been a voracious consumer and not content to just sort of do one thing. So like if you follow me on Last FM or Spotify, you'd see like the stuff I listen to is like all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And people try to peg me and they really can't because I really just like I dabble in so many things. And I'm always like, what's next? What's coming? Even now having gone through enough time, I'm like, well, this band was influenced by that band that I grew up listening to. Like we grew up listening to the same things, but we're 20 years apart. So I just sort of feel like in comics too, it's like I'm curious about what's next, what's different. I know when I got to Vertigo and people started pitching me, there was a lot of the usual suspects pitching me the same old things,
Yeah.
and I was like, this isn't very exciting. And I think that's also then why I'm like, why am I not looking at other types of people than the standard cliche comic book fan, which is guys looking just like us.
Yeah.
Because it's like, who's going to bring me something that's a little different than what I've seen before? And so, yeah, when I go into the shops, I'm trying to pick up a lot of issue ones, try to see what else is out there.
Right.
But I always feel behind with the people who are really good now with the internet and know where to look and find artists, because there's so much noise, and I don't necessarily I'm only on Instagram and not on anything else, so I don't have a lot of access in that regard.
Well, I think if you're only gonna pick one, Instagram is probably it. Yeah, it is interesting. So yeah, where are you in the world these days? Are you still in
I moved to Boise a little over 4 weeks ago.
Boise? That
Yeah.
was not on the list. Boise, Idaho.
I
Okay.
saw it was great because Joe Quesada's viral Idaho campaign provided great cover for me to sneak away while everyone's looking at him. While privately is like, I will be the biggest comic book publisher in Idaho. You just wait. Um,
Is,
um,
is Idaho the new hotbed for comics publishing? Is it the new Portland or
I mean, I
Manhattan?
hope not because lived around enough comics people. Like, be nice. It's nice and quiet here. No, I had my chosen family lived here, and I'd visited a couple times, and was like, this is kind of a vibe I'm digging. Los Angeles did not come back. I felt from pandemic properly.
Mm.
Things
Mm-hmm.
just sort of seemed always a little bit off kilter, and people don't know how to behave anymore, and it was just time to maybe make a change. So I'd visited here. I like the vibe. It's a college town. It's a little quirky.
Yeah.
Like to describe it's like Portland, but without the bad attitude, which I'm sure we'll get a lot of angry messages about from Portlanders, but they know what's going on there.
Dude, during those early 2000s, I remember very clearly 3 different people I knew were moving to Portland. And like, what are you going to do? I don't know. I'm just moving there. And all 3 of them were assholes. So I just realized that I'm never going to Portland, Oregon. It's just
Yeah,
full of assholes. Yeah.
yeah.
So
I mean, and it's changed over the years too, where it's like I was just talking to people about this the other night because it used to be in Portland. Like, I mean, I worked at a video store, I worked at a record store, and it was accepted. Kind of everybody in your retailer chains or baristas or whatever that's not what they were doing. It was always like,
yeah.
well, what do you do when you're not here? And the city was very accepting to that and very open to artists and creatives. And they always ask, why do comic people come here? I'm like, I think because it rains so much and you're used to staying indoors anyway. So if you're a cartoonist sitting there laboring over your graphic novel, it's much
Yeah.
easier. There's no when it's rainy and gray. But yeah, it's kind of changed over time as the city got more expensive. Definitely after I left, like rent went crazy, and that's when a lot of comics folks are having trouble maintaining. So, and it's also, I think, had its own issues through the pandemic and has its
Right.
own crises at the moment. But, it treated me well for the times I was there. But I was definitely, when I returned to California after that, there's like a moment where you cross the grapevine and everything speeds up. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is what I've been missing for 20 years. Speed. Everyone's going somewhere.
That's right. You got stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if Boise just is like just as, different post COVID, but you weren't there, so you're just accepting it as it is.
Talking to
Right?
people, it doesn't seem like it's got quite that problem. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think they wrote it out a little more open than other places. They weren't quite as locked down. And also there might be an element of refreshing because of the Boise State is here, so there might have been certain populations
right.
in and out.
Yeah.
But I went to my first concert, and it was like I could have been standing in line in Portland, like the way people looked and all the eclectic of it, and then the library here is very comics active, and they just 2 weeks ago through the Boise Comics Arts Festival, and brought in a bunch of people, and it's open to the free to the public for 2 days, and you just get a lot of. It was just a nice, different than pace in terms of people came in. They were not being rushed through. They were not like this. I spent a fortune to get here. I need to get everything. It was more like I want to talk about what you were doing. It felt very old school. Like, what are these books? Oh, you made these. That's amazing. So it was really nice just to get a different kind of vibe here. And there's a Boise comics history guy who I was talking to a bit, who was just like, I'm adding you to the list of Boise creators. I'm like, all right, cool.
The Boise comics history guy.
Yeah.
You have a decent shop there?
Yeah. I go to Captain Comics.
Okay.
It's funny. Comics. At first I thought like, oh, this is actually, I was watching, Philip sent me to watch an episode with you and the guy from Third Eye.
Oh yeah.
And he was talking about shops, that just order like the basics, and their rack is not very deep. And for the first 2 weeks at Captain, I'm like, oh, that's one of these stores. This is what they're like, huh? They just have one of these racks, and if they don't have it, it's not here. Yeah. And then somehow I had never noticed, like, oh, that thing I thought was a storeroom. That's where everything's at. There's a whole back room. So I even told them that. I apologize. I thought you were one way. But like, they've been great. We started up a full box.
Nice.
So far, only one person has been like, "Are you that Jamie Rich?" So either they're really being nice to me, or I'm like still get to go incognito. I don't know, but
well, you show up in the ringer tee as opposed to the shirt and tie. Nobody knows how to take you, right?
Yeah. And they got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles poster on the door, which is like triggering. Like, just escape.
Oh, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get into some turtles. But before we do, so you get that dream editor job, right? You're coming in to Vertigo, and you're accepting pitches. Now here, I mentioned earlier that I had to, go and find that Booster Gold number 7. Went to the biggest Booster Gold fan I know, who used to own a comic shop in Florida. Aaron insists that he was went to a panel with Gerard Way and said, you've done all this other stuff. Why have you never done Doom Patrol? And he said, well, I put in a pitch. I put a pitch together, and we kind of went at a cover and the whole thing. And so Aaron insists that his asking that question was the domino that started the chain reaction that led to Young Animals.
I don't think. I mean,
can we tell him he's right? He's such a sweet guy.
I mean, that might, you never know. That could have gotten around. Someone was there and was like, hey, did you know? Because Gerard started with Dio and Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Jim had traveled. I think Jim went to South America and went to backstage at one of their My Chemical Romance's concerts. Like, it started as a conversation, I think, with those three. Because eventually when Shelly and I were brought in, it was like there kind of was already a plan. Like, he's gonna do Doom Patrol, Shade the Changing Girl, Cave Carson as a cybernetic guy, and this thing called Mother Panic. Like, it came in pretty quickly and pretty fully formed in that regard. And so there were a few months there of quick activity. You know, credit to Shelly, she's actually was still there and was driving most of that. I was pretty jealous, actually. I was like, I can work on that. And so, and then, yeah, after she left the company, I took over Vertigo and Young Animal. And I think, I'm not even sure issue 1 had even come out at that point. If that was it, if it had, that was it. That was number 1 was the only one out. Because I remember testing all those Giro stickers. They were everywhere around the DC offices for like the next several years. Like, you'd find another roll of them. Like, do we have more Giro stickers?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And I'm sure that, you know, when they move eventually, that will find even more.
Yes.
So it's right about this time that you're still putting out books, by the way. Archer Co. comes out in 2018 about this time. And
it had been written before I joined DC, so there was a holdover of some of the stuff that I had written that hadn't been published yet.
Yeah. Is that strange promoting a book while you also? I guess it's not. I mean, if your day job is working in a video store, right? It doesn't. That's not that strange promoting a book, but is it? I mean, is there anything weird about that?
Yeah, because DC in particular is very wants to control their editors' public actions. So I didn't do a lot of promoting for Archer Co. at that point. I think it was the second volume, so and it had taken a few years to come out, and so I was kind of too ensconced in DC at that moment to spend a lot of time chasing it. I think I did a couple of interviews and things, but I had to get permission for that. And then I did a few conventions, because actually probably around that time I did a couple of my last conventions as creator, but I was becoming Batman group editor.
Yeah.
And I think it was a New York Con sharing a table with Joelle, where she was just like, it's really interesting watching because everyone talks to you differently now. And I was like, they do? She's like, yeah, all the talent that comes up, they want something from you now. Like, oh
well,
I didn't notice, but
it's one of the most coveted jobs in comics, right? The Batman group editor.
And that's also was around the time I quit most social media, knowing that I'm like, I don't need this. I don't need this. And never regretted it. So a lot was happening at that point. Moving over, because Tom and I had worked together on Sheriff of Babylon and Mr. Miracle, and so it was a natural move to jump over and start working with him over there.
Right. So are you basically, the two of you are kind of shaping all of the titles underneath? I mean, how many titles are in the Batman family at that point?
So under Tom's writing, everything got kind of siloed. He was more than happy to be like, let the guys on Detective do what they want to do. He was also trying to maneuver around not getting too caught up in other events. So we were finding ways to make sure we could stay contained, because he had a mission of like, I wanted to like have this straight ahead story, because we had The Wedding and City of Bane. That was always in the cards. So Detective was the main title, and then there was, I think, some various Robins and Nightwings and things. So Chris Conroy, who now runs Black Label, was the senior editor of the Batman group, and so ran most of those.
Mm-hmm.
While I was running all the Tom books and whatever. I often ended up editing whatever crazy thing Dan DiDio was like, I need X such and such. Who wants to edit it? And I'll just do it. So like the best one was Steve Orlando, and worked with Brittany Holzer and I on Electric Warriors, which was just like, I forget what Dan was referencing. It was whatever video game came before Fortnite. He's like, we need something like that. And And then also Electric Warriors was this name that we had at DC that was like needy, the usual, you need to use this name or it goes away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we started off with, I think it was 12 issues, but then the sales were bad. And so we did like 4 or 5. Travel Foreman drew most of it. It's a really weird, strange series. It has the gold Lex Luthor, like Steve Orlando pulled out of, I think, 1 million DC or whatever that was called. And so he eventually printed a couple hardcover bound copies for everyone who worked on it because it didn't get collected. But
Right.
people be like, "Why are you editing that?" And it's like, "Well, my boss wanted it."
Yeah.
But at the same time, we got to kind of goof off and try something that we wouldn't have done otherwise. So why not?
Yeah. You have to find those moments of exploration and fun,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. So, like, how does that feel? I mean, that's about as corporate comics gets, right? You come from this kind of real underground, alternative kind of comics place, and you end up here. Does that mess with your head at all? Like, is there a small Jamie in there who's like calling you a poser or anything? Like, where are the a sellout?
Not in that regard, but yeah, there was parts of me that's like, if you just left and you could go sit in your house and write and do what you wanted. But it was balanced out quite a bit with those oddball things, or Tom and I were always getting in trouble in Batman for the stuff we like to do. Like the most infamous was the double date 2 issues where Superman and Batman go on a double date and they go to a carnival where it's cosplay night and they switch costumes so they won't get recognized. And Dio and Bob Harris, which is like, they did not like it. Like, what do you guys? This is silly. This is just silly. And then it sold out, and we had to reprint it. And then for a while there, it was like, all right, you guys know what you're doing. And I was always getting in trouble for it being violent. And I'm like, I was the Vertigo guy. I don't notice blood. I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah. So we're doing that kind of stuff in Batman, but then at the same time, we're doing Mr. Miracle. Eventually, Strange Adventures, Supergirl. So we were having we had these other outlets to just do, because no one bothered us or tried to talk us out of anything on those. Like there was just like, you guys can do that, particularly after Mr. Miracle. Like, all right, you got something going, it works. So that gave me a creative outlet in that regard. But yeah, there was a lot of having to learn to navigate such things and navigate bigger concerns, and still try to protect talent. Like the balance of protecting company IP and talent is all over the place, and companies always gonna win if they
Sure.
want to.
Yeah.
So there was part of me that was, like some cases where you're just like, what am I doing? Like, why am I arguing over this kind of thing? And there was a particular streak post Batman Damned where from on high there was a kind of a don't do anything risque mandate that caused some problems for a while. That's because it was just like, well, why do I have to make this dumb decision because somebody up high thinks that some 12-year-old, like at that time the Harley Quinn cartoon started coming out, and she calls Wonder Woman the C word. And we had been told that we can't do anything out of risque with Harley Quinn because children buy her pajamas. Yeah. And I was like, more children can find your cartoon more easily than anyone's going to find her comic books.
Right.
And so like the Joker movie was happening, and Warner Brothers was so scared of it that like what we were like, I did a Joker comic with John Carpenter that came out, and they wouldn't let it was supposed to come out the Wednesday that the movie came out, and they like made us put it out the following Wednesday because they didn't want to compete. And it's like, do you understand how many copies even like it sold well, but comparatively,
but even then, you're not going to take a single movie ticket out because somebody bought the comic book.
Yeah. So this is all coming from Warner Brothers, like within DC with Dio and Jim. It was like, that was not an issue. Like they knew what we were doing, but it was so having to like worry about where is these other things going to come from that's going to drive us crazy, and how do you deal with it when it comes. But I remember when I was being interviewed by Jim Lee over the phone for the Vertigo job, he asked me, he's like, well, you've done like really indie stuff. Can you do things that aren't, quite so indie? And I was like, dude, you call it indie, but to me, it's all the same. It's just a matter of budget. You give me money,
Yeah.
I can hire different talent. I'm going to hire different talent. But what we did at Oni was based on like, we don't have a lot of money, so we got to get
Right.
people who are crazy enough to do it for that. And that's kind of what I'm carrying into. And the next thing is it's getting indie with a budget. So like, I can do whatever the hell I want.
I do want to deal with that, but before we do, let's maintain. I want to
Yeah.
talk about your time. How do you transition? Because this seems like a hard right turn to go from DC to Tapas.
So I was burning out. That was middle of the pandemic. We'd gone through 2 layoffs. DC was at that point demanding, like, so every layoff was like, well, now we're not going to change the amount of work that needs to be done. You all just need to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
there I am in a 1-bedroom apartment. Literally, I'm like working on this computer and then standing up and stepping 2 feet over and turning to look at a TV screen at night. And it's like, that was my world. Me
Yeah.
and the pug, and that was it. And working long hours and still always being behind because there
Oh
was just
yeah.
so much going on that I just was burning out. And that's when I was really hitting, like, why am I doing this for these? Because at that point you've got AT&T coming in and buying, and actually I was interviewing at Tapas when they were selling to Discovery, and I was like, I gotta get out now because like I'm making money for these jerks that don't care about us, don't care about what we're doing. So
Yeah.
that's when the punk rock kid kicked in and was like, screw corporate guys.
Screw the man. Yeah.
Um, I mean, when the head of AT&T laughed because someone in the giant town hall had posted the question like, what's going to happen to the discounts we're getting on our phones? Like, who cares about your phone bill, you plebes? Was basically his answer. And I was like, no, we get a really good deal because we work for AT&T. And that makes a difference to families
Yeah.
and things. So was starting to look around, and Michelle Wells had moved to Tapas, and I was like, well, if she's over there, there's got to be something. And I applied, and I immediately get a response of like, are you serious? Because if you're serious, let's talk. I'm like, no, I'm deathly serious. And in my brain, I was like, this is just gonna get me out of DC, and I want to get back to doing my own thing. But Tapas was also offering me the opportunity. Like, they wanted me to create full original content and establish a studio in that regard. But yeah, less than 10 months into it, I was realizing Michelle was ready to do it. My team was ready to do it, but the company was not prepared for what it was going to require. And
Is
then
that like,
IDW sort of popped up.
so you mean like budget or what? Yeah.
Budget, time, because like
Okay.
webtoons are long, and you have to launch, like, so you're going to do like 50 chapters per season, but you're going to launch with 20 to 30, and then you're going to be weekly. So you're going to burn through everything very quick. So to establish that down the road,
Oh yeah.
pay pittances for it, but still it's going to cost you because it's so much. And then that's the time. And also we were looking at can we get bigger talent in here, which was going to cost even more. And it just
Yeah.
it was a good experience because I helped build a new pipeline for them, with this guy Michael Paolilli, who was my production manager, and then also sort of entering a space where my staff was a dozen women under 30 and one dude, and
This is where you belong, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Brendan don't mind one very gay dude. And when I first got there, the Brady Bunch Zoom, like, I could tell they were terrified of me. They're like, who is this old guy coming in here and he's going to tell us what to do? He's going to kick us around. So I was like, I need to learn how to engage with this young staff
So you
and
turned your
show them
ball
I'm
cap
not.
around and you grabbed your skateboard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I was like, hello, fellow kids. No, I just like, like anybody, you just talk to them
Yeah.
and you listen and figure out, okay, how do we do this together? And so by the end, they were quite like, we were quite a unit. Um, I was not wrong though in getting out, because like 2 months later they fired all of them and Michelle, and so I would have been out on my ass. So Maggie Howell, who I had worked with at Vertigo, had moved over to IDW and was like, kept telling, it's kind of the same like Shelly, like, you gotta just to ask him. He said he can say no, but he's who we want. And so
Yeah.
Nachi Marsham reached out, and it was the right time, and so I jumped over there.
Well, and so that obviously, I want to deal with a little bit with that IDW space, but I just want to note that you did leave Tapas and you did leave DC, and did not get laid off at either. And I think that's something to be proud of right there. That's got to go on a resume.
Yeah, I'm the leaver. I left Dark Horse, I left Oni, I left AEW. I've avoided. I'm starting to be like, maybe when I leave, people should start to worry.
It's time to go.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was working with Mike Martz over at Aftershock, and he left, and I went, that means something.
Oh, yeah. Editors and chiefs don't leave for good reason. I mean, to be fair for IDW, with whatever other issues I would have had, like, there was part of me that was also going to be temporary, because I was looking for what really was next for me.
So you felt like IDW was temporary, right?
Yeah, I thought I was going to move into TV, which was a stupid time to be like, I'm going to move into TV.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
But yeah, so, I mean, it's not like I'm sitting there with one foot out the door, but there's always an aspect of like, I'm going to be paying attention to what else is going on, because this is not, licensed comics were not for me. And even as it expanded when I became editor-in-chief, I was right when creator-owned was being dialed back there. So it was like not really my strength.
So how long are you there? What, like 18 months, something like that?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Because you had some decent sized books out during that period, right? You know, when you talk about Turtles, like there was some.
Yeah, I mean, Turtles was the main thing that I was a driver on. We also had, I mean, as I came in, Heather Rantos was just sort of redoing the Star Trek, which was a pretty big relaunch, and particularly managed to score in terms of critical acclaim, got first Eisner nominations ever for Star Trek comics. Maggie Howell had found Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees and was starting to develop that. So primarily when I was there, I edited some Godzilla stuff and was helping shape Godzilla. So I edited Godzilla Here There Be Dragons, which also got Eisner nominations. I got Frank Thierry an Eisner nomination, or Frank Thierry earned it, but under the book, and which was great, because that never occurred to me, like, oh, you hadn't been before. And then working with a team to put together the Turtles plan, because we had Last Ronin, like a couple months into my being there was when the Last Ronin collection came out, which was insane in terms of just like, it's just sold so fast
and sold.
Yeah, we came out the Wednesday of Comic-Con, and we had printed for what we thought would last us a year. And before we left Comic-Con, we were figuring out how quickly can we get more of these printed, because suddenly like Amazon took a ton, and it was just, so we instigated second and third printings there, because we had to pay more to print domestically to get them faster, and then we put a next printing in overseas to get them cheaper. So it was just like, people want Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Last Ronin is reminding them, lapsed fans, like, this is what I love about it. It's like, we should be able to compete with that on the main title. And at that point, I was talking about Turtles should be up there with Batman and Spider-Man, as this is a property that can lead the industry.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
So we were San Diego, gosh, 2 years ago, I guess it almost would have been, was when we were pushing Charles Beecham. Like, you got to find talent. We were talking all kinds of things, but he's like, I think Jason Aaron is leaving Marvel and is going to do it. And so we kind of built from there. And once Charles was gone, Maggie Howell and Nick Nino and Dave Wilgus and I got focused on like who can draw this. And at some point we hit on that plan of like, well, the outline has 4 individual stories for the first issues. Let's go out. We can get some people who have told us they were too busy to do the whole series, and why don't we just get a bunch of like heavy hitters and really. And we were getting lots of responses from talent that was like, yeah, why haven't I ever drawn Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Why does no one ask me to do that? And discovering like there's this great love amongst the creative industry that wants to do that.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
So yeah, we put our money. We were like, we're gonna sell 100,000 easy, and then Thundercats happened. And they're like, well, we got to beat Nikki. Got to do better than Thundercats. and the Transformers had happened. It's like, can we beat all of them? That was our goal.
Yeah.
And so we had 300,000. Number 1. Back with my buddy Joel Jones.
Dude, that's incredible, and especially in this day and age, it's just phenomenal.
And that I knew it was good.
Yeah.
Having read the first 5 scripts before I left, I knew like they were good. That Jason was really giving it everything he had, and really loved what he was doing, and all of the artists coming in were really digging it as well. And so I was like, so we're gonna sell a lot, and there's gonna actually, be of course variants and retail exclusives and all that hype behind it. But of the core we're gonna sell, I feel like people are gonna stick with it and hopefully tell other people like, no, it's actually really good.
I read the Raphael issue. I haven't read a Turtles book in probably, I don't know, ever. No, I haven't read those early ones, but I was in. I actually did set up a subscription like right then and there. That's really good.
Same. I hadn't read it since like I think the last time I read them when it was in First Comics reprinted the originals in color.
Yeah.
I'd never seen any of the movies. The cartoon hit. I was moved on by that point. So it was like I was not, and that was part of when I got there. And I love Tom Waltz and I love Sophie Campbell, but there was at that point the TMNT was like an issue 120 something, and it just happens in these kinds of comics. It's so locked up in its own continuity.
Yeah.
I was like, where's the Turtles? There's all these other characters. Where are these are their book. And so that was the notion, is like, we got to just break it back down. We didn't erase any continuity. We have to put it in a place where you can break it back down and just give you the basic 4 guys for a bit. So that anyone can, like you, could pick it up and go like, I understand this.
Yeah.
Not confused by all these other situations. So.
Yeah, there was nothing about that needed. I mean, obviously he's dropped into a situation. Did I need to see him being dropped in? Maybe, but I didn't. I mean, it's a prison. I get it. I know how that goes.
Mark Doyle always defended it. It's like Age of Apocalypse. You start reading it, and Wolverine doesn't have an arm. And you're like, but as a fan, you're like, that's cool. I want to find out what happened.
Yeah.
And that's the whole goal is like put them in a place that intrigues you enough. Like, well, I want to see where it goes next.
Ah, that's really good. Yeah, that's really good. You don't have to you don't have to spoon feed it to them because you're learning something new about this character, right? Yeah.
So it was really a team. There's such a team effort going on. For whatever else is going on at IDW, like I had such an awesome editorial staff that like there were no knuckleheads. It was just straight up like everyone was pitching in, everyone was finding things to do that they loved. And so it was great to work with. Not that I haven't worked with great staffs before, but there's always someone where you're like, I'm gonna get rid of that guy. So it was just so there was a little bittersweet element of leaving them because it was like we really were doing sort of cool stuff together. And
so what's going on over there? Why can't they keep anybody in that head position?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of corporate challenges, and at least under Nachi, there was a push to let's pay more. Let's get talent in that gets paid more and try to make these books seem more prestige, which is what you've seen happen on Star Trek.
Yeah.
But licensing can be an uphill battle because, there's another company involved who wants their take and they want their say. And I feel like more and more that's becoming the norm. And so it sometimes you have to fight to be like, this is what I think is the right thing to do. Or you're pushing up against brand concerns at that point. So yeah, for me, it was just like, this is not, again, was not sort of my forte. Like if DC was corporate working with, outside studios and a corporate company at the same time, it's like, this is like double what
Yeah.
I need it to be. That's why I got lucky that I jumped in on Godzilla, because Toho was awesome.
Oh
And
yeah.
those guys were at a point where, Godzilla's having a great moment, and those guys were at a point like, how can we capitalize on this? What can we do? And there was definitely excellent people at Paramount, like, that we got to work with, who I could talk to and be like, this is what I think should happen, and here's why. And we'd find ways to do it. And there was a lot there with that number one. Like, we're putting it on the line. If we don't do what we say we're going to do, we still have to pay you your minimum guarantee. And then we
Right.
go, and you then have the ability to lord over us the rest of the time. Like, well, told you. But Amy Jerishow in particular saw that, like, there's something that can be done here. Like, we weren't breaking any toys, but we were going to, like, how do we step away from what feels comfortable?
Yeah. As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about an interview I just did with Mad Cave's Mark Irwin. And he's talking about the mix between licensed books, original, IP, and creator owned, right?
Yeah.
And you've worked in all of those realms. And he was saying, ideally you're looking at a third, but sometimes a big project comes in and you got to bid for it, or you got to jump out there. So basically, I think what I'm getting to is, in this new one, it's basically going to be those three, right?
Nope. Nope.
Nope.
We are unified in a no licensed. We're all creator owned.
All creator owned.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When I had my first meetings with Eric Gitter, who is our CEO, he was like, how much money did you guys spend to get Turtles this time? And I told him, he's like, all right, imagine how many comics you can make if I gave you that much money. He's like, I've got that much money. So I was like, okay, this sounds good. This sounds interesting. I've known Eric for like 20 years. We crossed paths at Oni. He tried to get Cut My Hair going as a TV show. We had a writer named Peter Murrieta, who was very talented and one of the main, I think, the lead writer for most of Wizards of Waverly Place. Yeah. He did a show called, I think, Welcome to Tucson, or Greetings from Tucson, something like that. That was on very short lived, but he read to Cut My Hair, and like, he got it. He had a whole take on how to do it for TV. So I knew Eric through that and the conversations we had then, and watched, saw Scott Pilgrim happen, Atomic Blonde, Extraction, and saw his relationships with talent, saw how he took care of those things over the years. He and Oni ultimately parted ways. But like, he continued to work in the background with comic book talent. And so the guys that have been with him that whole time would swear by, his loyalty and his interest. And so here was a guy, normally if a Hollywood dude came to me and he's like, I'm going to bankroll you to start a company, I'd be like, yeah, get out of here. Ha ha ha. I'm not an idiot. But here I had a guy who understood what comics are, understood the business, and was interested in creating a better company for talent, to where, one of our pitches that you come in and we're going to talk to you about, like, where do you want this to go? We're going to do the comic book, but what else do you want out of it?
Right.
And how do we manage that for you? Including even, if there is a TV show, how much would you like to be involved? What should we fight for? That kind of thing. So I was very interested, and then he was like, and Philip Sablik is also probably going to come over, and it'd be you two and Jeremy Hahn, who Jeremy was orchestrating a lot of these talks and stuff. And I was like, well, shit. If it's Philip Sablik and me and Jeremy, like, of course, like, I can't imagine. I keep describing this company like I'm telling you, here's a unicorn, and you're like, there's no unicorn. It's like, no, I swear to God, it's a unicorn. So yeah, it's just all the pieces were there, and creator-owned, creator-driven comics is my heart, and it's like, this is what, and it's like I said, I'd been looking like, this is the thing I've been waiting for. This is, I mean, this is my, I'm gonna stake this everything on this. Like, this is my, I have no move left in comics. This is the one.
Well,
So we're
you've reached
excited.
about as high as it goes. Otherwise, what? So how do you compete though? I mean, that's creator owned is its own marketplace, right?
Right.
Every time some creator comes up with something that they want to go and pitch to publishers, like it becomes, in many cases, there are bidding wars. There's definitely a constant back and forth competition between these companies. Entering that fray, how do you distinguish yourself?
I mean, that's the biggest question that I get all the time, and it's hard to answer because there's no obvious, like, we're not going to publish with this gimmick or this through this channel, or we're going to only do books with glitter in them. It's going to be a situation where the three of us, Jeremy, Philip, and myself, are taking all of our years of experience, looking at all the publishers we've worked with, remembering our conversations we've had with other creators, and be like, what has been wrong this whole time? What do people never fix? And how do we fix it? How do we just create a better place for everyone to work? So, and that includes also, how do we interact with retailers in a better way? How do we get to fans? And so a lot of what we want to build is just something where you're just going to have to see us walk the walk, because all we want to do is create good material. We're not going to be, we're not going to worry about competing with Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We will have to worry about competing with other publishers, but I'm also of the mind of, like, there's room enough for everybody.
Yeah.
More good comics are good for the comics industry. More good comics for retailers to sell is good for the comics. I mean, I made a joke about Thundercats, but Nick Barucci at Dynamite and I were talking that whole time about trying to figure out crossovers and the healthy competition of it. Like, if someone goes in to buy Thundercats and also buys Turtles, and both of them are good, and then they buy Ultimate Spider-Man and it's good,
yeah,
that's just best for everybody.
I brought up the story before. It's, going back to, you talking about the 90s, the early 90s, where things were crazy. The death of Superman was happening. Everybody else got out of the way, but Valiant puts out Bloodshot #1 on that same day because they know everybody's going into the store.
Yeah.
So they're not going to just buy one book. They're going to look around for what else is new. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. More selection is good, especially now that stores, really, their job is to become curators. What sort of store am I, and what am I putting on the shelves to reflect that? So
yeah, so part of what our thing will be is, like, how do we make sure that retailers are informed and have the tools they have, so that if we get people into their shop, they know what we're selling and how to sell it.
yeah,
And I think that's sometimes missing, to where books are just put out there. Like, once they're printed and they're solicited, the job is done. And it's like,
no,
we're kind of focusing on, like, how do we make sure we're there every step of the way, alongside the talent, alongside the retailers, that our partners are never left without the resources they need.
yeah,
And again,
absolutely.
sounds like a unicorn, but, like, we're just gonna have to prove it. And, like,
Yeah,
Philip and I particularly, like, have a reputation. Jeremy has sold a lot of comics
he sure
for
has.
retailers, so it's like, at least we have something to lean on. It's like, we've done this before, so hopefully we can get some trust and some faith that, like, we're here to do what we say.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, if nothing else, I I look at you two, you three rather. I think the world of Jeremy as well. But you know, I've already done the interview with Philip. Has not out yet as of this recording, but I'm looking forward to it. I might do you guys back to back just to see, you know, where we can catch you, because you're about to tell me the name of the place, right? Is right now.
Well, you know it already, because I'm sure Philip told you in his. He tried
We
to pull
ran out of time. He was gonna
some kind of Rich Johnston on me, like pretend you know, and I'm like, oh yeah. He tried that in San Diego too, and it didn't work there
I
either.
know. Well, you know, you were drunk then. I thought maybe if it didn't work when you're drunk, maybe it'll happen when you're sober. It's
No, we're very close.
yeah,
I'm not sure when this will air, but by New York Comic Con, I mean, we've had the name, we've just been sort of squaring it away. People thought it was weird we announced without the name. I was like, because none of you guys would leave us alone. We'd only been together for like 6 weeks, so we had to do something.
We will reveal the baby's name when the baby is born.
Yeah,
That's it. I get it. Although I'm telling you, you could do worse than redacted. It's a solid name.
Easy logo to create,
dude. It's
rubber
right
stamp.
there. Exactly.
Just like release a cover where everyone's eyes are covered with a black bar. Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do.
So you've had one of the, you know, I think of the most interesting spanning careers, especially for someone who's gone back and forth from writing and editorial multiple times, right? When you look back on this whole thing, as you find yourself in a Boise retirement home and trying to convince people that you made them funny books, what sort of change would you have liked to have left? Right, whether the industry itself has changed or something that you were personally able to do, is there some piece of comics that you would like to leave better than you found it?
Definitely the way talent is treated and how the material is approached, and yeah, the opening up everything to be like, you can, comics can be anything, so why limit who does it and what stories they tell? I feel like what I've learned in the last almost 10 years now of going back into editing was that previously editing, I never managed anybody else in the companies. I mean, when I left Oni, James Lucas Jones was the assistant editor and Joe Nosmack was publisher. And they hired one guy to replace me who was going to be a jack of all trades and promoted James. So I never really managed a big staff. Even at Dark Horse, you know, I had assistant editors under me. But like, you know, when you're managing Ben Abernathy, it's like people forget that was Ben's first job and he was my assistant. And it was like,
oh wow,
yeah, it's like that was just man. I could sit back and let him do all the work. So, but what I discovered was like I'd always enjoyed editing in terms of like you can look at a lot of those Oni books when someone did their first work, and in issue 1 to issue 4 they become a completely different artist.
Yeah,
and it was, and I always was saying like we have to find them just before they're totally ready, because when they're totally ready, someone else is going to grab them. So you've got to see them and give them the platform, because things change when they have to do that much work and when they know people are going to see it. But then over the years at DC, with having a staff and then Tapas and IDW, I had learned like, oh, I can work with young editorial talent in the same way. And I can nurture that and give, and then see them blossom and then see them do the things that they want to do. You know, Brittany Holzer and I had a long relationship together. And in those pandemic years, when it was me, her, and Bixie Matthew doing everything that wasn't Batman, because we became the Justice League group all of a sudden, which was everything. And that, but doing Future State, doing Wonder Woman and Superman Future State, some of the best comics we've ever made. And we did it all together. Everyone was working on everything. Yeah. So when I have people look back in my career, and it's a really weird time to talk about this. So for people context, John Cassaday, passed away yesterday. Bernie Miro last week, who was a friend, took his life. And actually really made me think about this because I hadn't talked to him in a while and didn't know he was struggling. That I would rather people look back and not, they can talk about my books, but I'd rather they'd be like, look at all those people that he worked with and gave opportunities to or helped break through. Like that's where I want to leave things. And that, I think that does achieve then the notion of some of those people might not have gotten those opportunities otherwise. Which is not at all patting myself on the back. It's just, if anything, then you can be like, he had good taste.
That's the tombstone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jamie S. Rich, he had good taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I didn't. Yeah. I don't want to. Let's not go there. We're all dealing with our own mortality. I think a little. It's a little more sensitive at the moment, right? Yeah. Anyway, looking at the state of comics, you've been through ups and downs. You've been on every side of it. What do you think is the biggest risk facing the comics industry? People are always going to make art. We're always going to be able to do that. But the industry of comics, what would you say is the biggest risk facing?
To a degree, just the ever splintering landscape and the change in technology. For as much as that opens us up to be able to do other things, it creates further competition or further hurdles for how the material reaches people. No one's quite cracked the digital conundrum yet. Webtoons is getting there, and that's a whole other evolution of storytelling. And even those are starting to now come around. People want to hold the objects in their hands, and so those are getting printed.
Yeah.
So continuing to roll with that and to continue to be current. I think this industry has struggled for the last couple decades with what is there for the world besides superheroes. And we've seen that grow and we've seen that move into other media. And I think still we're being challenged again of bringing in other audiences that aren't already here. You see it, like, why aren't the kids reading manga jumping over? And that's an industry problem because I don't know about you, in the time you've been in, I've noticed every couple of years someone's like, this manga stuff's really popular. It's like, yeah, it's not a fad. Yeah. I remember Joe Nosemack and I used to talk about that, and I think he even wrote an article for like Newsarama about it, of like hip hop is also another area, a genre of music where people are like, it's a fad, it'll go away. 30 years later, 50 years later, it's the dominant force. Yes. Manga is not going anywhere. So we need to figure out how to use it and how to approach it. And it's getting better because talent that is influenced by that is making their own comics, but they're often doing it in other places than the core of the comics industry. So I think that's, again, going to be our challenge. How do people want stories? They want experience. They want the experience of even of serialized storytelling. TV shows us that. So how do we continue to adapt to the new technology and find the things that are relevant to today?
That's amen. That sounds, yeah, I'm absolutely there with you. What gives you hope when you look at where we are?
I mean, it is that I constantly am meeting younger people who not only love current comics, but know the like obscure things or finding things from the past. And just are as passionate. And I think that you see that in every medium. It's like people like to crap on the millennials, and I'm with them, but I have found Gen Z and Gen X, we get along pretty well. Partially crapping on the millennials, but
yeah, well, we have.
But I've met a lot of just younger people who are passionate for things, aren't as self-serious as they're often painted to be, but still have like pretty righteous concerns about the world. And so, and also there's always going to be people who just are a little bit broken and want to do comics. Always going to be somebody that's like, this is all I can do, this is the only thing I want to do. There's more Paul Popes in the world, thank God, hopefully. I think he's like one of the last great, like, that dude could never have been anything but this.
He truly I was legitimately just talking about Paul and how we haven't seen him in a little while, so I hope he's out there brooding on something.
I think he's still working. bless him, he's still working on Battling Boy too. And I think there's other stuff. There's other projects I've heard about. So he's got a couple irons in the fire. I mean,
Okay, good.
he did a Turtles cover for me. I've gotten him just about every company I've worked at.
Yeah.
He's gonna make you earn it, but he's always worth it.
Modern master. All right. Well, Jamie, this has been super fun. Thank you so much for spending the time today. I know that it's got to be at a premium when you're launching a company. Where can people find you on Instagram?
So I think it's just my name, Jamie S. Rich. I forget how it's spelled out. But yeah, if you just search Jamie S. Rich, I'll pop up. There's a drawing of me and the pug. Sitting there, and that's all you're gonna see is pictures of pugs and me going to concerts. It's about all that I ever post, but that's the place you're gonna most likely find me.
Awesome. Well, I will check it out. Hi again. Thanks so much for watching Comic Industry Insiders. It, as always, is our pleasure to talk to the movers and shakers of comics and to bring you those conversations. We'd love it if you'd support us with a like and subscribe, and telling your friends is always good, but really what we want to do is hear from you. Any questions, any suggestions you have about our show, any suggested guests, frankly, anything at all, we'd love to hear from you. Our producer is nearly always Stephanie Gerk, and our researcher is Anthony Militano, who makes me look much smarter than I am. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Namaste, y'all.